ahead. Okay, there we go. So, as you know, AMWPA, we're the American Muslim Women's Physician Association. We're based in Texas, but we pretty much help all over the country. We're an organization founded by women in medicine to empower women and specifically empower communities. So, education, mentorship, community well-being, those are all the major factors that our organization is based upon, and that's why we're here today. Okay. So whoever's screen is shared, would you guys mind refreshing the slides? I think there's one that's disconnected. Okay, so inshallah, we'll start off with a prayer. As always, whenever we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and everything that we do, it causes an immense amount of blessings. So inshallah, we'll be starting our program with a short prayer. So I'll be reading the Quranic recitation and then I'll read the English translator afterward, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. So read in the name of your Lord who created humans from a clinging clot. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught humanity what they knew not. So, as Muslim physicians, inshallah, all of us, we need to keep in mind that behind everything that we do, our intentions need to remain pure and that we're doing this to help humanity. And inshallah, whenever we do everything that we do, whether it's part of our application or as part of our practice, for especially for those who are who are starting medical school and everything, we need to keep our intentions pure. And as we're moving forward, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will add blessings and in everything that we do. Sorry, 1 second, slight technical difficulty. Okay, I guess
I think we could move to the objective slide.
yeah. I'm not able to, sometimes it's letting me click forward, sometimes it's not. So,
Oh, okay.
okay. So today's objectives are we're going to understand the purpose of secondary essays. Yeah. We're gonna develop a strategy before writing, so we kind of don't go into all of this blindfolded. We're gonna come up with compelling responses that kind of, show our adcoms, who we are as individuals, and kind of, sell your application and who you are as an individual. We're gonna talk about common mistakes that a lot of people make that we might have made ourselves, but when we were initially writing. And a lot of times, as y'all know, our secondary prompts, a lot of them are very similar. So to pretty much reuse our essays while also advocating and tailoring each of them to each school. And then inshallah, at the very end, you'll be able to review 1 to 2 secondaries with one of us. Okay, so for introductions, my name is Hiram Fatima. I'll be attending UT Health San Antonio, also known as the Long School of Medicine, and I'm an incoming MS1. And I'm going to pass the mic off so all of our wonderful panelists can introduce themselves.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Labiba. I'm going to be an incoming MS1 at Baylor at the Houston campus.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Michelle Sayed. I'm an incoming MS1 at UTMB, which is UT Medical Branch in Galveston. Be starting this month, inshallah.
Salam everybody. I'm Alia. I'm an upcoming MS2 at Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine.
Assalamualaikum. I'm Sana. I'm an MS3 at UT Southwestern.
Okay, so inshallah, what are secondaries? What's their purpose? What are they asking? So when we submitted our primary application, and this is just a general PSA, no matter where you are in your application cycle right now, whether you're pre-med, whether you're currently applying or plan to apply next cycle, this is still a very informative workshop for you to kind of understand what's going to be happening in the future or where you are. So in terms of secondaries, when you first submit your primary application, that application is geared for the entire application system. So, as Texas residents, we apply to TMD SAS. So it's a common application, common activities and goals that's sent out for all of the schools that you're applying to. So secondary specifically is pretty much showing why you would be an excellent medical student for that school specifically. So the goal of the primary application was to show that, you're going to be a great med student and that you want to be a doctor and you're highlighting that. And for your secondaries, you're specifically showing why you'd be an excellent medical student at that school specifically. So, as I mentioned, the purpose of these applications are to pretty much show that you fit in with the mission of the school. It shows that you're able to reflect and you're able to communicate really well, which are very important qualities that a future physician needs to have. And it shows pretty much interest in the school. So, whenever you write these secondary applications, you're pretty much researching the school and you're committing to their values. Because, and at the end of the day, whenever you're at a medical school, you're representing that medical school. So that medical school wants to know that you're a strong person, you're a strong role model, and you're someone that they'd be proud to have their name on your white coat as, essentially. So another major factor, and I'm sure you guys have heard this, all throughout your journey, is that you want to show and not tell. So instead of having active verbs saying you did this or you did that, whether that be volunteering, shadowing, you want to show that. So whether that be through specific clinical experiences, volunteer experiences, you really want to demonstrate those qualities instead of saying them outright. And remember that a lot of the things that you have done as pre-meds, all of us, we all know that there's like a specific checklist that we mentally have to check off, the clinical hours, the research experience, the shadowing, all of that. But the way to really stand out is to have those specific stories that highlight specific characteristics of you that other people might not have. Because at the end of the day, whenever you're kind of selling yourself to the adcoms, they want to see that you would be an excellent addition to their class, not just as, a set of stats or a set of values, but as a person. Because remember that whenever you enter a medical school class, whether that be somewhere like a really small class like Dell, where they only admit 30 students, to, somewhere like Long, which is about 220, you're with these 200 or so people for the rest of the 4 years. So they really want to make sure that whenever they develop your class, they want to make sure that everyone will fit really well. They have different characteristics. They will work together really well as they're pursuing their medical journey. So you want to subtly showcase all of these qualities and all these things about yourself in your writing without explicitly saying so.
So Hiram did a great job overviewing like what points we want to emphasize. Now it's how do we go about doing this? So it's really easy to take secondary prompts at surface level, but admission committee really asks a question just to get a service level answer. Treat it as almost like a psychological test where to write a compelling essay, you have to read between the lines of the prompt and figure out what they're really asking you. So like the literal question, what they're asking here might be um like why our school? But the hidden question that you have to dissect is what trait or like core competency are they evaluating? So to answer a question like this, you would want to go into or onto the school's website, read about their mission, which we'll talk about later as well. But you really want to extract what are they asking? Are they trying to evaluate, like if they're asking a question about your past leadership skills, are they trying to see how do you act under pressure? How do you manage stress? So like if one of the literal questions is talk about a hard time that you've had and how you overcame it, to dig deeper into that would be to recognize that they're asking, when medical school gets stressful, are you going to fall over? Or do you have healthy coping mechanisms? And do you have the humility to ask for help when you need it? And so, like, don't fall into the trap of focusing too much on the problem or the literal thing that they're asking, and make sure that you're proving to them that you have like this problem-solving logic and emotional maturity, and really skills that are translatable to your medical school. If we can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so how do we plan our answers? The basic outline, so the hook and the context, you always want to set up some kind of interesting story. But like we mentioned before, avoid giving like a bland introduction. Like I volunteered there, I shadowed here. You want to give something that has a bit higher stakes. Not that you want to exaggerate your story, but really hone in on the details that did matter. Um, who was this impacting? Make sure that when you speak about the actions and what you did, that you're giving tangible things. Try not to be too much of an observer in your answers. And if that situation you were more of an observer, and you learned through other people's actions, that may not be the greatest story to go with. This is relative, and you'll have to figure it out question by question. And that's why we're here too, to help you guys evaluate that. But you want to make sure that you're presenting yourself as someone who takes action, and you want to demonstrate the outcome of your actions. And so, I'm sorry. Yeah, don't focus on like how sad or difficult the challenge was, but really emphasize your internal process, what drives you, and whatever those hidden questions are.
So one common secondary prompt that you'll probably see is why this school. You're probably familiar with writing these for like college applications as well. So for med schools, it is really important that you make sure that the essay you write for this prompt is answering this question and really showing that you've done your research about the school and you're not just kind of copy pasting things between schools. So our tips for that would be to make sure you read the school's mission statement. Usually, if you go on their website, they'll have a specific tab dedicated to like their mission, vision, how the school is structured, the curriculum. So you can read up on that, learn how they try to address those values, and then try to connect that with yours. So you can use the school website. You can also use the MSAR, which is like available through AMCAS. What we would recommend is that you go to the website and find kind of specific programs that fit your interests, maybe like a handful of them, and then try to connect it with things that you might have already done. So maybe you have like a specific research interest, you've done some work for that in undergrad, in your extracurriculars, and you find a program that lines up with that well in that school. Mention those programs by name and how you think that you'll be able to make an impact given your previous experience and what you've seen that they offer you and the resources, and then connect that with your long-term goals as a physician. Some common mistakes that you want to avoid in these YS essays and also in general, in all these secondary prompts, is making sure, one, to not repeat your primary application. Sometimes schools will, again, ask, like, in your primary, you had your personal statement was like, why medicine? Sometimes some schools will repeat that question in your secondary prompt, but you want to make sure you're answering it from a different angle. Make sure you use different experiences to support that. Try to be as unique as possible in every different question, even between like secondary prompts if it's for the same school. Um, and make sure to actually answer the prompt. So one thing that I was doing a lot when I was writing my secondaries is that there are a lot of prompts that have overlap between schools. So you are able to kind of like double up and use those essays over and over again. But it's really important to make sure you are carefully reading the prompt again and again, no matter how close those prompts are. Every time you're switching over to a different school and writing for another secondary, to make sure if there's anything specific in their prompts that they wanted addressed, that you're adjusting for that, making sure that you're not writing the wrong school name, those kind of like basic things. Same thing for like avoiding generic YS essays, as we just discussed. You want to make sure that you're specifically referencing programs that are specific to that school, being really intentional with how you would fit into those missions at that school. And then, as we talked about earlier, listing experiences instead of reflecting. So make sure you're showing and not just telling. And then doing just some basic proofreading, things like, did I use the right school name, grammar, that kind of stuff. Obviously, AI is like a little bit more in use nowadays. So if you are using that to look over your essay, make sure you go over that again too, looking through it yourself, making sure there's nothing out of place or that it doesn't sound like you anymore. And then finally, this is probably like my main tip is don't wait till the last minute. Everything is rolling. Most of you have probably already submitted your primaries, at least like maybe for TMD SAS, and like maybe are just waiting around for the secondaries to come in. This is like kind of prime time for you to be pre-writing those secondaries. I think that's really helpful because once the secondaries start coming, it's going to be like really, really fast. And there's like 3 or 4 essays per school, and they are evaluated on a rolling admissions basis. If you haven't gotten your secondary yet, like if you haven't gotten the invitation yet, you can still go online and like look at what those secondary prompts were for that school from previous years and start pre-writing already. And then a huge tip too is to create a secondary database. So like it's very simple, just, open up an Excel sheet, write down what schools you're applying to, when they're due, or what time the secondary invite comes in. So you're like really keeping in track. And because a lot of those schools have secondary prompts that overlap and you might be using essays over and over again or the same ideas, if you want to just like jot down for each of those schools what those prompts were so that you can go back and reference like, oh, I wrote this for Long, or I wrote this for Dell, so I can use this for um, Texas Tech or something.
So, here's an example. This is one of my responses to UTMB, one of UTMB's secondary questions. If you want to take a moment to just skim through the question and the answer, I'll give maybe about a minute. Okay, so I hope you all got a moment just to skim through. Just a couple things I wanted to point out in this one. Um, See how the starting, like this was a volunteer experience that I was speaking about, and it was something that I emphasized in my primaries as well. And so this is the same activity that I wrote about a lot in my primaries, but I'm picking out this specific experience. And so it is a repetition of an activity, but if it's a unique experience. And so feel free to reuse activities if you can pick out these unique experiences. And so I start out with, I try to make the hook interesting and engaging, like see how it's thrown into a situation where you're trying to visualize yourself like, okay, he nodded politely at me. Um, Rather than saying, I just volunteered here and I encountered this. So this is what we mean by really trying to illustrate a situation. And I break it down by like admitting that I felt guilty and that I had made a mistake here, and I try to rectify that mistake. And UTMB is a very service-oriented school. If you're familiar, they volunteer with the local prison system. They do a lot for their own city as well. And so the things I really wanted to emphasize here were how I've learned from this and what I've learned about vulnerable populations and how I want to do better in serving them in the future. And then at the very end, I connected to the kind of person that I want to become. And so the reflection is kind of broken down into how I feel that I grew and improved from this situation and what I see my future being and how I want to continue to improve. And so I don't mention UTMB specifically here, and I don't mention their mission either. But what I'm connecting myself to in the very last paragraph is UTMB's mission. And so like one of the subtle questions here, one of the hitting questions in all of your prompts are going to be, okay, so why are you a good fit for this school? And so you want to do your best to try to tie it back where it's possible to the school's mission, to their programs, to what you're working towards and how your future goals align with the school's goals.
And then just some final reminders and tips to sum up what we just talked about. That was a really great example from Mitchell right there about how to illustrate a story, to really like dive into what makes that story unique. You probably have a lot of experiences like this that you thought were just kind of like day-to-day experiences, but if you like really dissect them and show how they connect to why you want to be a physician, why you want to fit into the specific school, that's the most important part is really seeing how any mundane experience is really connected to your larger journey and how all that fits into your story.
Feel free to type any questions you might have in the chat, or raise your hand, unmute yourself. Yeah, yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Hi. I want to know how do you like think of these types of experiences? Like, how do you like come, not like come up, obviously it happened, but like, how do you how do you like when you're looking at the computer go like, okay, I should probably talk about this, like your experience of, oh, this experience happened to me. Like, how does that like come to your head?
I can give like one small tip about that. One thing I did before I started writing my primaries or my secondaries was like I kind of just did like a document where I just dumped all the things I could think of, like all the experiences I had. I just like listed like the activities, like, okay, I remember I shadowed here, I shadowed there, I did this extracurricular. And then under each of those things, I would just like write anything I could remember, like any small experience or anything. And then once I started writing like the essays for specific prompts, I would kind of look through that and like I kind of just had like a list of things that had happened to me on paper. It was like easier to like have them all listed in one place instead of like trying to remember constantly once I looked at the prompt. So like trying to connect those two things after they're already written down.
Thank you.
Just to add on to what Laviva said, that's a really awesome technique, especially if you're doing it proactively, like after you complete some kind of clinical experience, try to write down what you've learned, what you've remembered. But if you didn't do that, like I didn't really do that, I didn't write the technicalities, the technicals down. Um, the way that I kind of approached it was these full experiences and their reflections weren't like fully fledged out in my mind, right? And I'm sure they're not for a lot of people. But when I would think back to, difficulties I had or things that I learned, I would think about patients that really stuck out to me. I think working anywhere, volunteering anywhere, there will always be a couple patients that you remember everything about, start to finish. It might be some difficulty that they had that stood out to you, some interaction you had. And I think taking time to reflect on why that stood out to you so much, is really important. Like it's introspective, like it might tell you what you value or what you find satisfying through patient interactions. Or it might just be that that was actually a really good experience for you, and there was something that you learned that you need to extract from yourself and take time to reflect, to understand what you really learned and how you could relate it to the prompt.
Also, I just wanted to add for whoever is asking questions, if you kind of give us like a little like a mini introduction of where you are in the application cycle, so we can kind of gear that advice specifically towards you. And if there are any questions that you feel like you want to keep it anonymous, you can message me or any of the moderators privately, and we won't mention your name. We'll just have it like a general response. And if we do want to go over specific secondaries, we can also we can do breakout rooms and go through them as well. So we just want to help you guys as much as we can in whatever way possible. So hopefully after we go through some general questions, we can kind of dive down into specifics.
So I see Miriam sent a message in the chat. She asked, what are some things you would look for on your revisions? For example, did you try to limit the use of the word I or repetitive phrases like in that moment, etc.? Anyone want to take that question?
I can take it. Um, I think like you already listed like some examples of things that you want to look for. So just making sure like whenever you're reading your like writing that you're marking those and making sure like you're not overdoing that. Like some words like that can be eliminated, especially if you're over the word limit. And it's okay to use the word I, just if it's like multiple sentences in a row where that's how you're starting your sentence, maybe you want to rephrase. Other than that, I think the best way is to have someone else read over your writing. I think sometimes we can get really like tunnel vision by writing and rereading the same thing over and over again, and we can get very like connected to our own writing where we don't want to like take stuff out or make changes. And so it's always really good to get a fresh set of eyes. I wouldn't like get too many people reading because then you just get like too many opinions and it should be like your own writing at the end. Other than that, whenever before submitting, I would really put your writing through some like AI. So like Grammarly is what people use a lot, and that will point out like some minor mistakes or minor grammar things that you want to skip or not have in your application because that's like a huge red flag. Like you didn't take the time to fix small mistakes.
I also wanted to add, like Sana said, having somebody else read your essays is really helpful. I know something I did was I had the prompt, and then underneath it, I had like what I thought the hidden prompt was. And then I let someone else read it, and then I asked them like, "Do you think that I've answered this like the hidden prompt that I've written?" Um, and to make sure that you're not over explaining about that situation, but more about like your internal process that they're actually looking for rather than like just explaining the experience that happened.
So I like to add two specific things to that. Whenever we're using AI, we also have to be careful that a lot of times AI suggestions, they also, whenever you use suggestions from AI, they kind of take away the humanity of your writing. So whenever you're looking at your application as a whole, you really want to preserve your voice. So whenever if someone reads your application, they want to be able to imagine like you reading that out loud. So for example, if I read your essay, I should be able to imagine that you actually used those words, like you actually said that. So in terms of AI, it's a wonderful tool. It's extremely helpful, especially for grammar and making sure you actually answer the prompt. But you also have to be very creative with the way that you prompt AI to help you. So like for example, you can like Alia was saying, just making sure you actually answer the prompt. You can ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, do you think I actually answered this prompt? And in that case, it'll tell you yes or no, and then you can use that feedback accordingly. But in terms of, oh, can you help me come up with a different way to respond to this? All of that, it's very, very controversial, I'd say, especially because whenever it comes to these patient experiences, you actually want to get as specific as possible and make sure to use your own experiences. Because these adcoms, they've been here for like a lot. They've been here for like decades. They know what's real, they know what's not. Whenever you're using experiences, you want to talk about things that actually happen. And you can use AI, but as long as it just really adds on to what you already have written. So really trust yourself, trust your gut. Whenever you see these prompts, don't use AI at first. Don't ask for suggestions or what other people might have written. Write down your thoughts and just use AI as a refining tool. And one more thing in terms of, being repetitive in your applications. And when it comes to the word of, when it comes to using the word I, you also want to be careful because some questions ask for collaboration specifically. So you always want to use the word like we or the medical team, or this is what we did to kind of show that you were part of the medical team and that you didn't kind of just, jump in there and did everything yourself. I also have a question that someone asked me directly, and the question was if secondaries were a good place to address low grades, if someone wanted to tackle that.
Um, oh, Michelle, if you want to go.
Oh, no, I had maybe kind of generic advice. I would say don't mention it unless it's like asking you what's a difficulty you face or it's asking specifically about academics. I think secondaries in general are, I see them more of a place for you to expand on your personality, your drives, your mission. Um, yeah, I would recommend not over inserting, especially regarding low grades, unless there was like a specific adversity in your life or a specific difficulty or really or a specific event or series of events that you want to point out.
Also, most applications will have a section to be like, is there anything else that you want to address? So if you think that it's really important, you can also put it in there, but I wouldn't waste your secondary space to talk about it.
This is not secondary specific, but I remember on TMDAS, there's a question that specifically asks you to address like extenuating circumstances that might have affected your grades or your performance in school. So that would kind of be where you mention it. But if you, I guess if you didn't mention it then, and now is your only chance, I, and if, again, if the question is specifically asking for adversities, that's the only time I would bring it up.
And just one thing to add, I'm not trying to be like overly presumptuous of your grades or anything, but I think a lot of applicants tend to get too worried about one or two low grades. I think it's different if it might be like an entire semester where your GPA was a bit lower, but if it was like one or two sciences you didn't do as well, um, don't worry as much. They look at your most recent grades, they look for upwards trends, and one, two grades sticking out it like it's not going to wreck your chances.
I will say that if there was something on the extenuating circumstances that you did want to talk about, be comfortable to talk about it during interviews because there's a good chance they might bring that up. I know someone that they talked about their academic, like a non-academic withdrawal, and it was a health issue and all of that, and they had specific questions, so they had to get prepared to like kind of answer that. So it should be something you're comfortable talking about. It's not something that should bring up too many bad memories, something that you'd be in a confident place to kind of talk about how it still supports the rest of your application. We also had another question. So this is just for someone they were asking about shadowing experiences and how to really make them specific and unique and how to have them actually tie into what you want to do rather than it kind of sound very general. And this is kind of for like all ages, I guess, like kind of high school shadowing to undergrad to applying for medical school in terms of shadowing.
I can answer this question. I think the most biggest thing about shadowing is reflection and being able to showcase what you've gained from that experience. So, I mean, I think a lot of the presenters have hinted at this before, but one of the best parts about secondaries is highlighting your strengths and being able to talk about yourself and what you've gained from these experiences. And everything comes with reflection. So, I really think that if you're able to reflect on your experiences and pick out an experience that really you felt was unique and really represents the type of physician you want to be or the type of student you want to be, I think that's a good experience that you can expand on. And I think Michelle talked about it, and how you write really also is an art. You want to kind of talk about it in a story. You want to show what was happening in that moment, what was going through your mind, what you think was going through the mind of your patient, or whatever experience you're talking about. And that'll be a really good hook and grabber. But I would never, ever. End a secondary without reflection. Even if my secondary was 250 words, I would make sure that I always added some sort of reflection that I'd had from my experience in it, because you also want your admission committee to be able to see what you took away from that experience, not necessarily what they're seeing with that.
I think we could take just this last question. By Yusra in the chat, she asked, what's the word limit? It depends on each secondary. I would recommend, if you haven't received an invitation for a specific school, just Google what their what this year's secondaries are for that school, and you're more than likely to find their prompts and their word limits online.
I
Like if
actually have one more question that could be helpful. So someone was asking if interviews have to build on what you talk about in these secondary essays.
I mean, sometimes they'll ask you specifically about things. So there's also like there's open file interviews and closed file interviews. So some interviewers have like read your file completely, and then some interviews are like just completely blind. So like you go in, you introduce yourself, you talk about whatever you want to. If it is like an open file interview, sometimes they'll ask specifically like, "Hey, you talked about this experience. Can you like elaborate on that?" But like the interviews are pretty like free flowing. Like I wouldn't stress too much about that right now. You can really talk about whatever you want in the interviews. Yeah, like You can build on them, you can not talk about them if you don't want to. It's really up to you.
I would say I did like both in-state and out-of-state interviews, and almost like all of them, they asked me about stuff that I had already written about. So if you like mention a research project, for example, and interviews, I know like the cycle is so long, it can be quite a while since like you've submitted your applications. Just be ready to like remember what you wrote about and be able to talk about it, because they will pick out things from your application. I don't think I got like too many questions that were out of the blue or stuff that I hadn't already mentioned in my applications. And that goes for both in state and out of state. But of course, you can have like the closed interviews where it's just mostly a conversations. And those are really nice because you can guide the conversation wherever you want and highlight whatever your strengths are.
Awesome. Okay, I think we could move out to breakout rooms now. So if everyone checks on the bottom tab of Zoom, you'll see breakout rooms. Just go ahead and join a room. Try to, like, participants, please keep in mind that we want to balance out the rooms. So if you see one that already has like 5 people, try joining one of the ones that doesn't have as many. And yeah, we can start one-on-one reviews. Students, please have 1 or 2 secondaries in mind that you'd like us to review, to make sure that we get through everyone. We can't read through all of your secondary essays today, but yeah, pick 1 or 2. Whichever students are comfortable having their essays reviewed in front of others, we'll do them first. And whichever of you all prefer one-on-ones and want to wait for that, we'll do you guys afterwards. Please go ahead and join a room.